Everyone, it's good to see some of you here in the press theatre and the legislature on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nation. This is a regular media availability. We've been kind of out of sync for a couple of reasons over the past number of weeks, but it's been my hope that I can make myself available at least once a week to questions from the media, and that's certainly what we're doing today. But before I start, although there's no formal presentation, I do want to acknowledge that we are now a week into horrific events in Ukraine, the belligerence and unlawful activity of the Putin regime, putting countless lives at risk, destroying a civilization, quite frankly, for reasons not known to anyone but him. I am so proud as a British Columbian and as a Canadian to have our national response to be in unison with other allies around the world. Oftentimes people in countries that don't always agree are unanimous in their condemnation of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And I also want to acknowledge that British Columbians are prepared to open their hearts and their homes to refugees, as we have in previous events like this, whether it be Syria, Afghanistan, and many, many other hostile intrusions by nefarious governments that have put regular people at risk and displaced them from their homes and their livelihoods. So British Columbia stands ready, and we have been engaging with the federal government to ensure that as they bring forward their accelerated immigration and refugee plans, that British Columbia will be right there with them to assist those who need help at this most desperate of times. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Premier. As a reminder to those on the phone line, please press *1 to enter the queue. You're limited to one question and one follow-up. We'll start in the room today. Bender Sajan, CTV.
I just wanted to pick up on what you were talking about there. With the accelerated streams from the federal government, what does BC need to do to prepare? How many people do you think BC could actually accept, and over what period of time?
Well, we're certainly working with federal immigration officials. Nathan Cullen is the provincial minister responsible for the immigration program that we have in BC, which is very modest. He'll be reaching out to non-governmental organizations, faith groups who traditionally lead when it comes to finding homes and work and other necessities for refugees, wherever they may come from. So we're going to be working in collaboration with local on-the-ground agencies to make sure that we do everything we can to house and protect and care for as many people as we can. What that number is uncertain at this time, but there will be costs, of course. British Columbians have already given $1 million to the Red Cross to assist with preliminary work, and we will, of course, as a government, be there for healthcare costs, assisting with housing, and all of the other initiatives that do end up falling to the province to pay for in situations like this. This isn't the time to negotiate with the federal government on how best to do that. It's the time to be there for the federal government to meet the need as they deem it, and of course working with them to ensure that we don't go over capacity and make more difficulty for people than they're already experiencing.
Bender, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, and just closer to home, I'm sure you've seen the prices at the gas pump. There's criticism that the carbon tax is going up at April 1st at a penny a litre. You've spoken about potentially being able to do something to help British Columbians. Where are we at with that, and why won't your government consider pulling back some of those taxes?
Well, certainly the 1 cent a litre increase that's scheduled for April 1st is part of a federal mandate, and I'm not passing the buck when I say that. The federal government has a climate action plan, as does the province of British Columbia, and pricing carbon is a key component of that. We have committed as a government in 2 election campaigns to get to $50 a ton for taxing pollution, and we intend to do that come April 1st. Subsequent increases will be, and that of course was a result of a federal mandate. The federal government mandated all provinces to meet that objective, and we in BC, early adherents to carbon pricing going back to 2008, 2009, we're in a better position to meet the $50 a ton than some other jurisdictions. But I do understand that people, when they look at almost $2 a litre for gasoline, they immediately say, how can we reduce this? And taxation is a part of the increase, 1 cent, but an 18 cent a litre increase overnight has everything to do with international instability and, of course, the events unfolding in Ukraine today. having energy experts make those comments through the media, I think is helpful for British Columbians to understand that it may be easy for politicians to declare that taxes are the problem. Those taxes go to building our roads, to providing the transit, to making sure that our infrastructure is as modern as it can be. And having come through the atmospheric river this past fall, I think people understand better than in the past how fragile our infrastructure is and how important it is to make those investments. And carbon pricing and the gas taxes are part of that. And we'll certainly continue to monitor the situation. Minister Ralston's been clear on that. We put in place legislation to ensure that gouging wasn't happening. I think British Columbians would be very unhappy if they saw through the BC Utilities Commission and the legislation that we put in place that companies were taking advantage of international uncertainty to pad their profit margins. So we have protections in place for that undertaking, or that eventuality rather. And we'll monitor it closely, and if there's something more that we can do, we'll certainly take action.
Going to the phone lines now, Rob Shaw, Check News.
Hey, Premier. Just wondering when you plan on calling a by-election now that there is that vacancy in Vancouver-Kilchena.
Well, the last time I was asked, there wasn't a vacancy. I felt that Mr. Wilkinson might have felt he was being rushed out the door, but there is a vacancy. We're working to ensure that we can get that by-election called as quickly as possible. I know that in the past, governments have held off on calling by-elections in non-incumbent constituencies. I remember the former government waiting 5.5 months to fill a vacancy in Vancouver Mount Pleasant, one of the poorest postal codes in North America. That's not anything that I plan to do, although Kilchena doesn't fall into that category. I believe that people deserve representation in the legislature, and we're going to call that by-election. It'll be certainly before the House rises. The seat will be filled before the House rises for the summer.
Rob, do you have a follow-up?
Sure, thanks. Can I ask you about the new ferry legislation that's been written about this week? And it's kind of described as a stealthy way for the government to use its kind of majority on the Ferry Authority Board to control BC Ferries directly, start giving it orders and making demands without taking it back into government. Is that what's happening here? And do you want to exercise some more control over ferries? And is this how you're doing it?
Well, it is interesting that those that have been writing about this have been writing about ferries for decades. And I appreciate that might be a column that is readily available off the shelf. What we've been doing is ensuring that the public interest is in play when BC Ferries makes decisions. We passed legislation in the last Parliament to ensure that was in fact the case. It hasn't always been. We have no interest in managing the day-to-day activities of the BC Ferry Corporation. But we do believe, as the lone shareholder, that we have an obligation to coastal communities and ferry-dependent communities to make sure that they know that they have some say through their elected representatives, not as drivers of the administration and operations of the service, but to ensure that these basic public tests are met. And that's the objective of the legislation. It came as a result of a review that we did in the last term about ferry fares, ferry-dependent communities. And I believe this is a natural progression of that work, and it's not intended in any way to take control of BC Ferries. But it is part of our way of ensuring that the public interest is what we set out to do, and I'm confident the legislation will do that.
Richard Zussman, Global News.
Premier, ICBC is looking at profits now this year at $1.9 billion. You in the past were highly critical of the BC Liberal government about the way they used ICBC funds. How should the profits within the corporation be used now? Should ICBC save this money in case things turn sour again, or should this be money that's returned back to those who have insurance in this province?
I think it's a bit of both, Richard, quite frankly. Certainly, ICBC needs to ensure that it has enough in reserve to meet any eventuality, whether they have investments that they make on behalf of policyholders. We want to ensure those investments are robust. That's the role of the board and the executive. So they need a buffer in those situations. But we were able, through the COVID pandemic, to see rebates on 2 occasions go back to drivers, the policyholders. The intention of public auto insurance was not to build up large profits, not to build up padding bank accounts, or, quite frankly, to transfer those benefits back to government for other purposes. It was to protect drivers and to keep auto insurance as low as possible. That's the mandate of the corporation, and that's my expectation about how they'll deal with any increase in revenue that they have now and into the future.
Do you have a follow-up, Richard?
I do. We're anticipating some changes next week to the COVID-19 restrictions, the two big ones, mask mandates, as well as the vaccine card. Is there anything you see in the COVID data that makes you worried that we may, have to keep some of these policies in place? And is there any sense, I know the Prime Minister has been awfully busy with what's going on with Ukraine and Russia, but is there any sense that federal COVID rules, especially testing at the border, may be eased at some point soon?
Well, I think they're already taking steps at the federal level to ease testing requirements. I do believe that the data is going absolutely in the right direction. Dr. Henry and Minister Dix keep me regularly apprised. I'll have my full briefing on Monday, as I do every week. And we'll have a better understanding then of where we will go with advice from Dr. Henry and her public health team on the restrictions that remain in place in British Columbia. But I think that what we have been trying to get through to people is that everyone has a different level of comfort. We're 2 years into the COVID pandemic, and we find ourselves with more tools now than ever before. We have safe and effective vaccines. We have a good understanding about how we as individuals and families and communities need to interact with each other. And so I have a lot of faith and confidence in the good sense of British Columbians that any decision that Dr. Henry brings to us next week will be one that is measured and balanced, as she has been from the beginning, to good effect. And why British Columbians have been so responsive to health orders, quite frankly, is because they haven't been overly onerous. They have been thoughtful, and they have been trying to balance the different needs of individuals and communities and businesses. So I don't have any expectation that Dr. Henry is going to deviate from what she has been doing over the past 2 years, and that gives Minister Dix and I a lot of comfort that when we make the decisions and make those available to the public, that there will be a positive response to it. But everyone's going to be going at a different speed, and I fully intend, just coming out of cancer treatment, to continue wearing a mask inside and in social settings with people that I'm unfamiliar with. And I'm confident that people won't begrudge me that, and nor should anyone else. If British Columbians are comfortable wearing masks, you should let them wear masks. And if they're uncomfortable, provided the mandates have been lifted, then that's their right as well, or that's their choice, I should say. But I think British Columbians have learned a lot about themselves and about their community and about how they interact with their neighbours and their workmates and in the marketplace. And I'm absolutely convinced that British Columbians will do the right thing by themselves and by those around them.
Next question is from Lisa Cordasco, Vancouver Sun.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Premier. As you know, new numbers just come out recently showing the average home price in Vancouver is $2 million, townhouses $1 million, and housing affordability is top of mind for British Columbians. And despite the initiatives that your government has undertaken, both the rental and the ownership markets have, the prices have skyrocketed. I'm wondering what else your government could be doing to offer any hope that British Columbians can expect to be able to afford a place to live.
These are extraordinary times that we live in. The pandemic has compromised our ability to get more supply online. Talking to realtors and reviewing the information that they're providing to the public, scarcity leads to increased costs. So we need to build more. That means municipalities need to accelerate their processes, and we want to work collaboratively with municipalities and decision makers at the local level to make sure we can get more supply built as quickly as possible. We have been making record investments. You prefaced your question, Lisa, by saying that, and it is quite staggering the amount of money the province has driven into the housing market in the past 5 years. But despite those extraordinary efforts, despite bringing in a speculation and vacancy tax that is supported by 98% of British Columbians, that has turned 18,000 vacant houses into rental stock, despite those extraordinary initiatives, we still see prices being unaffordable, certainly in our metro centres for British Columbians. So we're going to keep working and keep trying to bring on more supply. We're going to try and use various tools at our disposal. Minister Robinson and Mr. Eby are working together on how we can try and reduce the extraordinary price wars, the bidding wars that happen when a house comes onto the market. And that's been, quite frankly, realtors are disappointed with that. We want to work with them to find what are their solutions. They know that their clients need to have the costs come down so that they can comfortably participate in bidding for a home. This is usually the largest decision that an individual or a family will make. We want to make sure that they can make those decisions confident that it's the right one. We've seen interest rates start to climb to address runaway inflation. These are going to be issues that everyone's going to be trying to balance. Developers, purchasers, sellers. So it's going to be a difficult and challenging number of months, but we stand ready to continue to make investments, to continue to work with municipalities to bring on more supply, because the only way we bring it down is to have more houses on the market than there are buyers, and that's nowhere near where we are right now.
Lisa, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I'm just wondering if there are any ideas being bandied about on how you might work more cooperatively with private developers to make home ownership or even rental housing more affordable.
Well, we're already seeing developers build more 2- and 3-bedroom units than bachelor units. That was one of the first initiatives that we wanted to drive through the various UDI and other development organizations. I live in Langford here on southern Vancouver Island, where the fastest growing city, certainly on Vancouver Island, very close in terms of growth to Surrey. And the development there is unprecedented, and it's because local council and the development community are finding ways to bring on supply that is literally grabbed as quickly as it becomes available. And the development community in my town are not building bachelor units. They're building 2- and 3-bedroom units because it's a family community with family prices. And I want to see that in Richmond. I want to see that in Burnaby. I want to see that in New Westminster and in Vancouver as well. As we build out SkyTrain and the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh developments that are on the books, working with the city and planners there, I think there's a lot of optimism in the near term. But right now, it's very, very challenging.
Next question is from Prabjot Kalan, Omni TV.
Hi, thank you so much for this question, and good afternoon, Premier. So maybe you heard about the latest incident happened in Kelowna last week. The one security girl was died due to brutal attack with the mental health person. And after that, a lot of question and safety concern is rising into the international students and the work permit holder, the people doing the odd jobs day and night. So any message you want to convey to them today about the security issues or anything on that?
Well, firstly, thank you for the question, and I want to convey my deepest condolences to the family of the young woman who lost her life while at work. That is not something that any family should have to experience, and I can't imagine, quite frankly, the horror that they're going through right now. With respect to the broader question of street violence and street safety, these are issues that have been emerging through the pandemic. I think part of our problem is that we've had 2 years of dislocation, mental health challenges that are well documented, that have been increasing because of isolation, because of uncertainty, because of fear of COVID and other challenges in the community. That has led to a rise in street violence. And we're working with law enforcement. We're working with communities. The Minister of Mental Health and Addictions is doing what she can to provide more comprehensive care, or complex care, for those who, quite frankly, shouldn't be in the community. They should be getting 24-hour care. These are issues that have been discussed for a number of years, and I think it's high time that we started building that complex care so that we can house those individuals that have serious mental health challenges, not in an incarcerated way, but in a way that they're getting the care that they need. I think the public supports that. We're bringing forward a number of complex care facilities across the province, and that will go a good distance to addressing the immediate concern. But I know that the City of Vancouver, I heard on my broadcast this morning, the City of Vancouver is bringing together interested parties across the spectrum to talk about how we can work together to give people a sense of comfort in their own communities. It's critically important that we do that. And I think that the solutions to these challenges rest in a variety of different places, and we need to all be listening attentively to those ideas as they come forward and taking action when we can.
Do you have a follow-up, Prabhat?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I was talking to the Kelowna RCMP about this case, and this is not the first one. Actually, this is a third incident in few months in Kelowna only when the person was killed with a mental health issue, and they're asking for more resources and more, like whatever. I know you already mentioned this, but what you're looking more specifically on that community?
Well, I can't speak specifically to Kelowna because I do believe the problem is not confined to the Okanagan. In fact, it's in communities right across BC, large and small. But I can say that the legislature and all-party committee has been reviewing the Police Act. It's almost a 50-year-old piece of legislation, and we're hopeful that the recommendations that come back from communities, this is due in the next number of weeks, that those recommendations will help the province, the federal government, and municipalities address the needs of transforming law enforcement so that we can ensure that law enforcement personnel have with them trained staff to assist with mental health issues rather than leaving it to those who don't necessarily have the training to address the issues. I've heard from municipal leaders for a decade and a half, almost as long as I've been a member of the legislature, that law enforcement are not equipped, they don't have the resources to be social workers as well as law enforcement. We need to make sure that they are as trained as they can be, to be sure, for sensitivity and ensuring that the right choices are made at the right time. But we need to add to that, not detract from it. This notion of defunding is, I think, does a disservice to everyone. We need to refund public safety to make sure that the right people are trained to do the job that they need to do in a very complex situation. Modernity, the world that we live in, is not as simple as it used to be. And that's creating even more challenges for people, vulnerable people. And we need to make sure we're protecting broader communities from those who are suffering from mental illness. Destigmatizing is part of it, but making sure the right people are there to intervene at the right time and getting those individuals to the care that they need rather than just taking them down the road and letting them go again without the supports that will keep everyone safe.
Next question is from Brianna Charlebois, Canadian Press.
Hi there. Thank you so much for taking my question. The federal government announced it is placing a 35% tariff for Russian exports to Canada. So I'm just wondering what the potential impact and the anticipated economic blowback the tariffs and the sanctions will have on BC. And then if you could speak specifically about the potential cost to major construction projects that rely on Russian steel, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. And I don't have an inventory of what projects are currently using Russian steel. I know there was a question in the legislature, which was a historic question, of a company that had contracted Russian steel in 2020, 2021, but was no longer using it. At the outset, I want to say that I support the federal government's sanction process. We have been absolutely clear to Minister Freeland that whatever British Columbia can do, we will, to support a coordinated effort. The only way we're going to change a brutal dictator's mind is to make it extremely uncomfortable for him to continue on the same course that he is on. And economic sanctions will work if they are universally embraced. And it appears in an unprecedented way, the international community is standing together against the intrusion into Ukraine and encouraging the Putin regime to back off. And we do that by enforcing sanctions. So we're looking right now, Minister of Finance and her team are looking at what the consequences would be to the private sector here. There is no role directly for the province to play in terms of purchases. We don't have a procurement arm that would make decisions like that. But there are provincially funded projects that are being built by the private sector that may well have a Russian component. And we're going to go through all of those projects and see what we can do about reducing that and ensuring that we keep the sanctions in place as they've been laid out by the federal government. I'm confident we can do that. And we're not at this point concerned that there will be a significant cost to British Columbians. But as that information becomes available, we'll make it public and you'll have access to that as soon as we have it.
Brianna, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that answer. So just going back actually to an earlier question, so we don't have an idea as to how many refugees we might be taking, or, right now it's very high level. You're going to take the federal government sort of.
Only to be in contact with the minister. Our minister has spoken with their minister. My office has been in touch with the PMO, the Prime Minister's office, letting them know that British Columbia stands ready. And it's not just the government, it's people. People right across the spectrum are opening their hearts and their homes to those that are having their lives turned upside down. That's who we are. We've done it in the past, and we're going to do it again. And it's largely driven by non-governmental organizations who are in the business of taking care of new arrivals to BC. We're going to be continuing to fund those organizations as we have in the past, and offering whatever guidance we can to the federal government about what numbers we can absorb here in BC. But I do want to give a caveat. I don't want it to diminish in any way our wholesale commitment to support the federal government. But more people came to British Columbia in the past year than have come internationally and from other provinces since the early 1990s. That's contributing to the housing challenges. That's contributing to other costs that we're all being exposed to. And despite that, I'm confident that British Columbians are ready, willing, and able to absorb as many Ukrainian refugees as we possibly can. But it is not without consequence. And just I'm glad for a second chance to answer the question. That doesn't change, I believe, the commitment of British Columbians to help. The world has turned its attention to Ukraine, and the brave and courageous leadership that we're seeing, not just in government, but on the streets, from elderly women with sunflower seeds in their hands, telling Russians to go home. That is so moving, not just for me, but for all British Columbians. And if we can't do everything we can to help people in their hour of need, then we're not truly global citizens, and I know British Columbians are.
Our last question today is from Rob Buffum, CTV VI.
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my question. Premier, I just wanted to get clarity, if I could, as to whether or not British Columbians can expect an announcement next week regarding the mask and vax card mandates. I know March 15th is the date to review that. In question period today, Minister Dix said that we can expect some information on that next week. So is that a reasonable expectation that we will hear next week about those restrictions?
Well, I think so, Rob, and I know you are regularly tuned in for Minister Dix and Dr. Henry's presentations. They have been regular for 2 years. When you think about that, it's quite staggering that for 2 years, almost on a daily basis, the two of them and all of the staff that support them have been trying to provide as much information to the media and to British Columbians as is possible. Dr. Henry has been foreshadowing next week as a likely time to review the other measures that are currently in place in British Columbia, and I have no reason to doubt that that's the track she's on. But I don't get a full briefing until Monday, and that's as it should be. Situations change. Test positivity may shift radically. There is a new variant of concern that Dr. Henry and her team are watching, and the global community is watching. So I don't want to assume anything, and that's one of the challenges of COVID-19 is that I remember like it was yesterday, the summer of 2021, when we had 500 active cases in British Columbia, and that is a distant memory, but we felt at that time that we had turned a corner. So I'll leave it to Dr. Henry and her experience and the team that she has in place to give me the information next week, and then we'll make decisions based on that. But I don't want to, I think that answers your question, and Adrian did as well in the House.
Rob, do you have a follow-up?
I do. I'm wondering about with skyrocketing gas prices and inflation and the cost of living, including, for rent. Is there anything further? You've been asked about this in different regards, but is there any consideration for a cap on gas or rent for folks who are, many people who are really going to be struggling in the months ahead?
Well, we did put a cap on rents. The former government had a 2% automatic increase for landlords to rent, as well as the cost of living. So it was the cost of living plus 2%. We eliminated that 2% and said that's not acceptable at a time of scarcity. And so rents have not gone up as much as they would have had the former government stayed in place. We've reduced ICBC costs by about $500 per policyholder, as well as directing the corporation to give not one but two rebates to good drivers. We've brought forward a child opportunity benefit that puts $1,600, $1,700 a year into the pockets of families. We've reduced the cost of childcare. We eliminated MSP premiums. I'm going to give you a list because affordability is in a whole bunch of places, and we've tried to address those areas where we can. But gasoline is a free market, and it is why we brought forward transparency legislation, was to ensure that that free market didn't take advantage of consumers by gouging at the pumps when there was an opportunity to do that. And now companies have to prove to the Independent Utilities Commission why they increased the cost of gasoline as much as they did for any given reason. We did put a cap in place during the rebuild of the Trans Mountain Pipeline into the Lower Mainland, as well as, of course, our supply chains through Highway 1 and Highway 3 during the atmospheric river, the aftermath of that. But those were extraordinary circumstances. And again, I want to remind people of how extraordinary British Columbians were at that time. We brought in rationing for the first time in the post-war era. And the British Columbians responded by saying, yeah, I'll take what I need and leave the rest for another citizen, another British Columbian. Those are the types of things we have to do as we get through these challenging times. An 18-cent increase in a litre of gas is not about taxation. It's about uncertainty in the marketplace. It's about instability as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And we need to, all of us need to act accordingly. We need to make choices about how we act, where we go, how we travel based on that. I know that's not an easy message to give or to receive, but that's the world we live in. And unfortunately, until such time as we get stability in the international marketplace, our prices are going to continue to be volatile.
That's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.